It's 1901. 60 feet below the surface off the coast of a small Greek island, a sponge diver named Elias Stadiatis pulls himself along the hull of a Roman cargo ship that's been sitting on the seafloor for 2,000 years. He's done this dozens of times. He knows what ancient wrecks look like: amphora stacks, marble statues, corroded bronze. But what he surfaces with that afternoon stops everyone on the salvage boat cold. A lump of fused bronze the size of a show bark's. Gears. Dozens of interlocking gears, miniaturized, precise, and impossibly, unmistakably mechanical. The year is 1901. The object is from 65 BC. And no one, not then, not now, has fully explained how it exists. That's the puzzle. But here's what most accounts leave out: the scientists who've studied it longest keep changing their answer. Not refining it. Changing it. And the deeper you go into the records, the stranger the contradictions become. The wreck was first discovered in 1900 by sponge divers sheltering from a storm near the island of Antikythera, between Crete and the Greek mainland. The Greek government organized a recovery effort, and over 18 months, divers pulled up bronze and marble statues, glassware, coins, and jewelry, one of the richest ancient shipwrecks ever found. The corroded bronze lump was logged, boxed, and largely ignored for 2 years. Then, in 1902, archaeologist Elias Stadiatis was cataloguing the collection in Athens when the lump cracked open from drying. Inside, a gear wheel. Inscribed with Greek text. Stadiatis immediately suggested it was some kind of astronomical clock. He was laughed out of the room. The consensus at the time was firm: ancient Greeks simply didn't make machines like this. The device was dismissed as a navigational astrolabe, misdated, or even planted. It sat in a museum case for 50 years while the argument quietly died. But the next chapter of this record is darker than most people realize. In 1951, British historian Derek de Solla Price saw photographs of the fragments and refused to let the question rest. He spent years arranging access to the physical pieces, and by 1959 he published a paper that shook the academic world. The Antikythera Mechanism, he argued, was a fully functional analog computing device, capable of tracking the movements of the sun and moon, predicting eclipses, and modeling the Greek calendar cycle known as the Metonic cycle, a 19-year pattern used to align lunar and solar calendars. Price called it 100 years ahead of its time. He was being conservative. Embarrassingly conservative, as it turned out. Because when X-ray imaging technology finally reached the fragments in the 1970s, and then high-resolution CT scanning in 2005, researchers discovered that the mechanism's internal complexity was not 100 years ahead of schedule. It was over 1,000. Gearing systems of equivalent sophistication don't reappear in the historical record until medieval Islamic astronomical clocks in the 10th century AD, and European astronomical clocks in the 14th. The Antikythera mechanism predates those by more than 1,200 years. And what I've found in the archives of those 2005 CT scans is that even the team that ran them, the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, admitted their own model was incomplete within 3 years of publishing it. This is where the official story starts to fall apart. Here's what the textbooks tell you: the mechanism was built around 100 BC, probably in Rhodes, possibly by a school connected to the astronomer Epochs. It tracked the Metonic cycle, the Saros eclipse cycle, and the 4-year Olympiad calendar. End of story. Now here are 3 things the textbooks quietly skip. First, the calendar dial on the back of the mechanism uses a month naming convention linked not to Rhodes, but to Corinth, or possibly one of its colonies in northwest Greece or Sicily. That's a geographical fingerprint that contradicts the Rhodes origin story almost entirely. When researchers at Cardiff University flagged this in 2014, it didn't make the popular science headlines. It should have. Second, the front dial was designed to show the positions of the 5 planets known to the ancient Greeks: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. But when researchers modeled what gears would be needed to do that accurately, they found the recovered fragments account for only a fraction of them. In the records I've kept on this, the current best estimate is that we may have recovered as little as 1/3 of the original mechanism. The missing gears, if they existed, would have made this device dramatically more complex than anything currently on display in Athens. Third, and this is the detail that was effectively buried for decades, the Parapegma inscription. A Parapegma was a Greek astronomical almanac, a public calendar that tracked star risings and their associated weather. The text fragments encoded into the mechanism's front plate reference specific star events. When those references were decoded and cross-checked against known ancient astronomical records in 2021, the alignment placed the device's calibration date not in 100 BC, but potentially as far back as 200 BC. That's a full century earlier than the consensus. Different location. Different era. Possibly a different maker entirely. And the third piece of that inscription was hidden from the public summary for reasons that remain unclear, flagged as requires further verification in 2021 and still unresolved. So why do scientists keep getting this wrong? Part of it is the nature of the object itself. The 82 surviving fragments fit together in multiple configurations. The gear counts are disputed because corrosion obscures tooth edges. Researchers working from the same CT scans have produced different gear counts in peer-reviewed papers published the same year. But part of it, and few in the field say this directly, is the weight of the original assumption. The idea that ancient Greeks were not capable of this kind of engineering is so deeply embedded in how we teach the ancient world that each new analysis tends to start from how do we fit this into what we know rather than what does this actually tell us. Price did it. The 2005 team did it. The 2021 team, to their credit, pushed harder, but even their reconstructed model requires gears for which there is currently no physical evidence. What we know for certain is this: the Antikythera mechanism is real, it is ancient, and it performs functions that our models of ancient technology say it should not be able to perform. Every decade, the reconstruction gets more complex. Every decade, the assumed origin shifts slightly. And every decade, new fragments of the inscription yield text that the previous team didn't catch. The ship that carried it sank, probably in a storm, sometime around 65 BC. Whatever it was built for, a patron's commission, a temple display, a navigator's tool, a philosopher's model of the cosmos, it went into the water with a crew that almost certainly had no idea what they were transporting. 2,000 years later, we pulled it out of the seafloor. And we're still not sure what it is. In the records I've kept on forgotten things, that's not a failure. That's the most honest thing science ever admits: the artifact is smarter than the explanation. The archivist will be back with another entry. If this one stayed with you, subscribe. One mystery, every week. The records don't run out.